Hello, friends. Put on your tinfoil hats. Let's begin. There's something surreal about hearing the same phrases repeated year after year. The objectives of the special military operation will, without doubt, be achieved. 4 years have passed, and what once sounded like a solemn promise has turned into an echo, bouncing off the walls of a tired society. It's no longer even ironic, just stale. The official tone remains unchanged, as if the endless loop of declarations could somehow substitute for actual results. The stage is the same, the faces are the same, the script hasn't evolved, only the backdrop has grown darker. The rhetoric insists that all this is necessary to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. Yet, as the words leave the podium, they twist in irony. When the very cause of suffering insists on eliminating itself, it's difficult to decide whether to laugh or cry. And so, the nation watches, half in disbelief, half in exhaustion. Promises of victory persist, but the substance of those promises dissolves like smoke. Meanwhile, another line comes, stern and resolute. If the opposing country and its foreign backers refuse to talk, Russia will achieve the liberation of its historical lands by military means. But who believes this now? The phrase that once stirred patriotic fervor now feels like an old record, played too many times, scratched, dulled, worn out. The myth of the second strongest army in the world used to command pride. Today, it elicits little more than weary silence, and for some, quiet laughter. The bravado has been replaced by disbelief, and disbelief has quietly turned into resignation. Even the officials try to paint success where none can be found. The defense minister proudly reports the liberation of Kupiansk, a strategically important city, he says. But somewhere, people remember that Kupiansk was already liberated once before, years ago. The announcement sounds like a replay of an old broadcast, now running on autopilot. To add substance to the claim, they show charts and infographics, numbers that look impressive only until you realize what they mean. Military spending is 5.1% of GDP, non-military defense-related costs 2.2%. In total, the ministry has consumed 7.3% of the country's wealth this year. The math answers a long-standing question: where did all the money go? And while some count budgets, others are being counted. Actor Dmitry Nagiev, once beloved by millions, now faces accusations for merely saying aloud what many whisper: that people are simply tired. Tired of the endless war, the grayness, the monotony. He said it gently, even cautiously, that the films, the talk shows, the constant reminders of conflict have drained the nation's spirit. He said people crave color again, light again, peace again. And that was enough to spark outrage. It's a rare moment when honesty survives in public speech. When asked what bright adventures he's had this year, Nagiev smiled sadly and said, "You're asking me that in the 4th year of war." That quiet answer carried more truth than all the slogans combined. Elsewhere, in another corner of the economy, Avtovaz's chief, Maxim Sokolov, tries to sound upbeat. He blames poor exports of Ladas on the high ruble exchange rate. A strong ruble, he explains, is terrible for export growth. But perhaps it's more than that. Perhaps foreign buyers simply have choices, ones that don't require patriotic explanations. The contrast is striking. While Mercedes and BMW struggle with sanctions, Lada struggles with reality. And the official line remains the same: everything would be fine if only not for those temporary challenges. Can the ruble be weakened, someone asks? The answer, yes, but why should it? As if the economy itself were a matter of pride, not livelihood. And so the disconnect widens. While officials quote GDP figures and talk of resilience, the ground-level reality tells another story entirely. Because somewhere far from Moscow's briefings and statistics, there are women, wives of men who went to Ukraine in search of fast money, promises, or redemption, now standing outside, holding banners, refusing to eat. They've been defrauded by developers who took their savings and vanished. They say they've been ignored by investigators, forgotten by the state. They number in the hundreds, from Rostov, Crimea, Krasnodar, Voronezh, Adygea, all desperate, all betrayed. Their husbands went to war. They were promised comfort and stability. Now they stand in the cold, hungry, abandoned. They are asking for help, but their voices are barely heard. The system that sent their families into battle now turns away. They say, "We are at a dead end. There are 400 of us. We don't know what to do. We are announcing a hunger strike." 18th of December, another date added to the long list of unheard appeals. And while those pleas echo unanswered, life continues, absurdly, tragically, chaotically. In Barnaul, for instance, a small initiative meant to help the military takes a bizarre turn. A local veteran, Colonel Vadim Karpov, organized students to make trench candles for soldiers. He even bought equipment with his own money and placed a container in a courtyard to collect wax. Within 24 hours, the container disappeared. Someone simply loaded it into their car and drove off. Maybe they needed it more. Maybe that's the new logic of survival. The irony is almost poetic. In a place where everything is taken, dreams, hopes, lives, even a donation bin isn't safe for long. And yet, we're told, everyone helps the special operation in their own way. The first cracks of irony widen into something deeper, a portrait of a society worn out, cynical, confused. But what comes next will reveal far more. Stay tuned. The full picture is just beginning to emerge. Don't forget to subscribe, because the second part will open the curtain completely. Part 2. The surface of calm that officials try to maintain begins to crack when you look closer at the lives of ordinary people. Behind the polished speeches and studio lights lies a landscape where exhaustion has settled into every conversation, every home. Those who still try to speak the truth face consequences, and those who stay silent carry the same fear. The fatigue is visible, not only in the faces of the people, but in the tone of their voices, in the way they lower their eyes when the news plays. The war that was supposed to be distant has entered kitchens, salaries, and family quarrels. It is in the prices at the store, the shortages, the sudden disappearances of people who once appeared on television but are now gone without explanation. The stories emerging from across the country paint a unified picture of quiet despair. In Rostov, where the wives of soldiers announced their hunger strike, the authorities promised to look into it, but no one came. In Crimea, women gather in small groups near administrative buildings, holding hand-painted signs that no one is supposed to notice. They speak in calm, measured tones. "We only want justice." The irony is that justice is what they believed they were protecting when their husbands went to war. In Krasnodar, the same scenario repeats itself. Tired faces, empty hands, words carried away by the winter wind. Local television never mentions them. Social networks try to erase their videos. Yet, they keep recording, keep speaking into their phones, sending messages that vanish into the noise of the internet. In Moscow, the contradiction is even sharper. The city glows with winter decorations, its wide avenues filled with lights, music, and the illusion of celebration. But walk a few streets away from Red Square, and the illusion fades. The homeless shelters are full, the lines at social aid centers grow longer. People talk about prices more than politics, about survival more than ideology. The festive lights reflect not hope, but a strange sense of unreality. A reminder that the show must go on, no matter what's happening beyond the camera frame. At the same time, the official media tries to control the narrative. They release reports about successes on the front, about liberated villages, about economic growth despite sanctions. But beneath these lines, even the language itself seems tired. There's no spark, no conviction left. News anchors deliver scripts like actors repeating roles they no longer believe in. Behind them, glossy charts move up and down, the illusion of motion, when in truth, everything is standing still. A quiet understanding grows among people. The truth has stopped living in official broadcasts. It lives now in the pauses, in what isn't said. And in this silence, other voices emerge. from the occupied towns, from families of prisoners, from those who once supported the campaign but now only wanted to end. Among them are soldiers' mothers, who travel hundreds of kilometers to military bases demanding to know where their sons are. Some are told their children are missing in action, others that they cannot be located for operational reasons. These words, empty of humanity, have become routine. They replace reality with bureaucracy. The mothers return home clutching papers instead of answers. Their stories never make it to television. Yet in small circles, in kitchens and message threads, they circulate quietly, building an invisible archive of pain. In Barnaul, after the container of wax was stolen, people laughed bitterly. "That's our national metaphor," someone said. "We try to help, and even that gets stolen." In social media comments, there was anger, but also resignation. Because deep down, everyone recognized the pattern. Nothing is sacred anymore. Every small act of decency is either taken away or ridiculed. And yet, people continue to make those small acts, because to stop would mean to surrender completely. In these tiny gestures, a different form of resistance lives on. But the absurdity continues. In a recent interview filmed by a pro-government journalist, a captured Ukrainian soldier tells his story. The interviewer asks personal questions, trying to paint a picture of the enemy as brutal, broken, or immoral. "Your father was in prison?" he asks. "Yes," the soldier replies. "What for?" "For murder." "And your scars?" "My father used to hit me with a hammer." The dialogue unfolds with a disturbing calmness, each question colder than the last. The interviewer seeks to make a point about Russian values, yet what emerges is something entirely different. A reflection of cruelty so normalized that even tragedy becomes material for propaganda. The young man, who has already lost everything, is forced to perform his trauma for the camera, and that, somehow, is considered storytelling. Elsewhere, a quiet development takes place that few pay attention to. Estonia begins constructing bunkers and shelters near its border with Russia. Slowly, methodically, without noise. The small Baltic nation, once dismissed as irrelevant, now treats the threat as inevitable. In Tallinn, construction crews work in frozen fields, installing reinforced concrete sections under the watch of local officials. The symbolism is stark. While Russia builds illusions, others build protection. Across the border, the same landscape feels frozen in time, unable to move forward or back. The contrast between action and stagnation is painful to watch. Back in Russia, absurd incidents fill the daily news. In Kazan, two young men break into a mobile store at night, stealing what they believe to be valuable phones, only to find they were dummy models. Their faces, captured on blurry CCTV, circulate online. It's called the robbery of late Putinism, a phrase that sounds humorous until you realize how symbolic it is. People chase illusions, not because they are fools, but because illusions are all that's left to chase. And beyond Russia's borders, the world watches in a mixture of fatigue and disbelief. In Israel, the 2025 reality looks very different. A nation surrounded by desert and conflict still manages to build, to cultivate, to export sand and stone, to create value where there seems to be none. Fields that should be barren are green thanks to innovation. Meanwhile, Russia, rich in gas, oil, gold, and diamonds, remains a place where citizens are told to tighten their belts for the sake of historical destiny. The contrast is painful. One country, despite war, invests in life. The other, despite abundance, invests in decay. Everywhere the same question rises. How much longer can the illusion hold? The leaders repeat that everything is under control, but even their tone betrays doubt. The official optimism feels forced, the smiles rehearsed. Behind the curtains of power, even those who once believed begin to whisper that the system cannot sustain itself much longer. Sanctions bite deeper, industries falter, corruption quietly grows like mold in an old building. People adapt by lowering expectations, not hoping for better, but merely hoping things don't get worse. There is a growing feeling that something irreversible has begun. A slow disintegration, not loud, not spectacular, but steady. And perhaps that's what makes it more dangerous. There will be no explosion, only silence, until the silence itself becomes unbearable. In the next part, we will go deeper into the aftermath, into what this transformation means for Russia's future, for its people, and for the rest of the world that continues to watch, waiting for a change that never comes. Stay with us. The conclusion will reveal what lies beneath the surface of this long, unending performance. Part 3. The deeper you look, the clearer the picture becomes. Not of a country rising, but of one slowly dissolving under the weight of its own contradictions. On the surface, everything seems in order. The speeches, the parades, the confident tone of television anchors. Yet underneath, a different rhythm beats, one of quiet discontent and fading hope. The cracks that began years ago are now widening, not with the sound of explosions, but with the silence of indifference. The machinery of propaganda keeps turning, but its gears grind louder, revealing the fatigue of a system that no longer believes in its own script. Ordinary Russians, those who once accepted the promises of stability and strength, now speak differently. They talk about leaving, about finding work abroad, about sending their children away to study in Europe or the United States, anywhere that feels normal. Flights to Istanbul and Dubai remain full. Tickets for any destination that offers escape are booked months in advance. The idea of patriotism has become hollow, something repeated for survival rather than belief. Even those who once shouted the loudest slogans now do so out of habit, not conviction. Beneath the noise of national pride lies a quiet migration of minds, an exodus not only of people, but of faith in the country's direction. Inside Russia, cities like St. Petersburg and Yekaterinburg have changed. The culture that once thrived there has turned cautious. Artists who used to provoke now self-censor. Journalists who once asked questions now write lifestyle stories. The atmosphere feels heavy, like a room with no air. In St. Petersburg, once the intellectual heart of dissent, the fear is not of arrest, though that still happens, but of futility. What's the point, people say? They don't listen anyway. That phrase has become the quiet anthem of an exhausted society. In Moscow, the contrast is sharper. Skyscrapers rise, new restaurants open, foreign brands return under new names. To the untrained eye, the city looks vibrant, alive, untouched by crisis. But beneath the surface, money circulates only among the few. The middle class, once the pride of Putin's stability, is shrinking. Salaries lag behind prices, and the ruble, though officially strong, buys less each month. Conversations about politics have turned into whispers. Even humor has changed tone. Softer, darker, careful not to cross the invisible line. The laughter that remains is defensive, not joyful. Across the regions, the reality is far harsher. In small towns of the Urals and Siberia, factories work in bursts, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks idle. People survive on partial pay and loans. Villages once dependent on agriculture now rely on subsidies that rarely arrive. Infrastructure decays quietly. Roads crumble, schools close, hospitals lose staff. The young leave, the old remain. In these places, the television is not just entertainment. It's the only voice left, the one that tells them life is getting better, even when their power cuts out mid-sentence. And then there are those who returned from the front, the veterans of the special operation, as the state calls them. They come back not as heroes, but as shadows of themselves. Some receive medals, others receive silence. Many are lost in bureaucracy, no compensation, no job, no support. They wander between military offices and social service centers, clutching documents that prove nothing. Their families talk of nightmares, of anger, of men unable to sleep or speak. In the news, they appear only briefly, smiling for the camera, shaking hands with local officials. After that, they disappear again into anonymity. Even the symbols of power feel brittle. The once mighty image of a confident state now depends on fear more than respect. Security agencies expand their authority. New laws are passed that restrict speech, gatherings, and even personal opinions online. The word foreign agent has become a mark not of betrayal, but of integrity, a label worn by those who still dare to speak. Independent journalists work from exile in Riga, Tbilisi, or Berlin, broadcasting through VPNs and social media channels. Their voices reach millions inside Russia, but they do so through digital tunnels, not airwaves. The battle for truth has moved entirely underground. Meanwhile, abroad, Russia's isolation deepens. In Brussels, NATO meetings now begin with discussions not about whether to expand, but how to contain. In Warsaw and Helsinki, new bases rise. Sweden and Finland, once neutral, are now firmly inside the alliance. In Beijing, support remains polite but distant, strategic, not emotional. China buys cheap oil, sells expensive technology, and speaks of friendship only when convenient. The balance of power that Moscow once boasted of has become dependence disguised as partnership. Even those nations that call themselves allies quietly prepare for the day when they may have to distance themselves. Inside the Kremlin, the image of control remains absolute, but the atmosphere is said to be tense. Advisors rotate, ministers fall out of favor, new names appear and vanish. Decisions are made not by strategy, but by instinct, by the desire to maintain stability at any cost. The war, which began as a show of strength, has turned into a slow erosion of authority. Each new decree feels smaller, more desperate. Even propaganda has shifted tone. Less triumph, more reassurance. It is no longer about victory, but about endurance. We will stand firm, the slogans say. But for how long and at what price? The people, once united by fear and fatigue, are beginning to change in subtle ways. Quiet acts of defiance spread. Someone paints a small blue and yellow line on a fence in Nizhny Novgorod. Someone else writes, "No to war," on a bus stop in Irkutsk. A student in Tomsk refuses to participate in a patriotic lesson. These gestures are small, but they multiply. They form the beginning of something fragile yet real, a sense that silence cannot last forever. History has shown that regimes fall not when they are weakest, but when people stop believing in their inevitability. At the same time, outside Russia, the world debates what comes next. In Washington and Brussels, analysts talk about post-Putin scenarios. Some imagine reform, others chaos. Economists warn of collapse, diplomats whisper about compromise. But all agree on one thing: the illusion of permanence has been broken. Russia can no longer pretend to be what it once was. Its empire of narratives is cracking, and no amount of censorship can fully seal the gaps. Back home, the propaganda machine continues to insist that everything is fine. But even the children who watch state television sense the falseness. Teachers read official texts with neutral voices. Students glance at each other, pretending to listen. A generation raised in contradiction is learning to decode truth between lines. They may not protest, but they remember. And remembering is the first act of resistance. The final irony is that the system built on control is now controlled by its own fear. Fear of its people, fear of change, fear of silence. The speeches grow longer, the parades more elaborate, but the meaning behind them has evaporated. The grandeur hides fragility. The music of the national anthem echoes across squares filled with fewer faces each year. In Israel, farmers harvest crops from desert soil. In Estonia, workers reinforce bunkers on frozen borders. In Ukraine, people rebuild homes shattered by missiles. And in Russia, a country of endless resources, citizens stand in line for essentials, for promises, for hope. The contrast is unbearable, and yet it defines this era. The story of modern Russia is no longer one of power, but of decay disguised as strength. And still, somewhere in this landscape of fatigue, there is resilience. Quiet, human, unspoken. A mother searching for her son, an artist refusing to lie, a student asking one forbidden question. These are the beginnings of change, the whispers that come before the storm. And so, as the year turns, one truth remains. No wall of propaganda, no fear, no law can forever silence a people who have learned to see. The silence that now fills the air is not submission, it is waiting. Waiting for a voice, a spark, a moment when the truth will no longer need to whisper. Until that moment comes, the country stands suspended between past and future, between illusion and awakening. History watches, quietly, knowing that even the longest performance must one day end, not with applause, but with truth.